The dust settled around her boots as Rebecca Ashford leveled her Colt revolver at the stagecoach driver's chest, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs and give away how terrified she truly was. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the Montana plains in July of 1876, and beneath the red bandana covering the lower half of her face, sweat trickled down her jaw. She had never pointed a gun at another human being before this moment, never even imagined she would be capable of such desperation. But 3 months of watching her younger brother waste away from consumption, while the doctor demanded payment she could not provide, had transformed her into someone she barely recognized. The stagecoach had been making its weekly run from Virginia City to Utica, Montana, carrying whatever cargo and passengers paid for transport across the unforgiving territory. Rebecca had chosen this particular stretch of road because it wound through a cluster of cottonwood trees that offered both shade and cover, a rare commodity in this harsh landscape. She had been waiting since dawn, her palms slick with nervous sweat, rehearsing the words she would say, trying to convince herself she could actually go through with this act that went against everything her parents had taught her before fever took them both 2 years prior. "Step down from that coach, nice and slow," Rebecca called out, deepening her voice as much as possible, though it still sounded thin and unconvincing to her own ears. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The driver, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, raised his weathered hands slowly, his eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Now, son, there's no need for this kind of trouble. We are not carrying much worth risking your neck over." Rebecca's grip tightened on the revolver, and she could feel it trembling slightly. "I will be the judge of that. I said get down." As the driver began to climb down from his perch, the stagecoach door swung open from the inside, and a man stepped out before she could order him to stay put. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds over the mountains. He wore a black vest over a white shirt, dark trousers, and boots that looked well-made but worn from actual use rather than for show. There was something about the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that suggested he was not easily frightened, that made Rebecca's already racing pulse quicken for an entirely different reason. "I think we can all remain calm here," the man said, his voice deep and steady, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. His gaze moved from the driver to Rebecca, and she saw no fear in his expression, only a careful assessment and something else she could not quite identify. "Nobody needs to get hurt." "That depends on whether you all do what I say," Rebecca replied, trying to inject more steel into her voice than she felt. "Empty your pockets, all of you. Valuables, cash, everything." The driver began to comply, pulling out a few crumpled bills from his vest pocket, but the dark-haired man did not move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made Rebecca feel exposed despite the bandana covering her face and the wide-brimmed hat pulled low over her eyes. "You know, your hands are shaking," he observed, his tone neither mocking nor unkind, simply matter of fact. "And that gun looks almost as scared as you sound. I am guessing this is your first time doing this sort of thing." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger mixing with embarrassment. "That does not mean I would not shoot you. Do not test me." "I am not trying to," he said, taking a small step forward. "My name is Daniel Wade. I own a ranch about 15 miles east of Utica. I am heading back there now after some business in Virginia City. And I am trying to figure out what would make someone like you desperate enough to hold up a stagecoach in broad daylight. Someone like me." Rebecca bristled at the assumption in his words. Someone who has probably never broken the law in their life, Daniel said. Someone whose hands are shaking not because they are trigger-happy, but because they are terrified. Someone who is doing this because they feel like they have run out of every other option. The accuracy of his words struck too close to home, and Rebecca felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "You do not know anything about me." "Maybe not," Daniel agreed, taking another cautious step forward. The driver had frozen in place, watching this exchange with wide eyes. "But I know desperation when I see it. I have been there myself, more times than I care to count. So why do not you tell me what you need, and maybe we can work something out that does not end with you on a wanted poster or worse." "Stay back," Rebecca warned, but her voice had lost its edge. The gun felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Daniel stopped moving, but he did not take his eyes off her. "How much do you need?" The question caught her so off guard that Rebecca almost lowered the weapon. "What? Money. That is what this is about, is it not? So how much do you need and what for?" Rebecca's throat tightened. She should not answer, should not engage with him at all, but there was something in his steady gray eyes that made her want to tell the truth for the first time in weeks. $200. My brother has consumption. The doctor in Utica says he needs medicine, special care. I have been working every job I can find, but it is not enough, and Thomas is getting worse every day. He is only 15 years old. He is all the family I have left. The confession hung in the air between them, and Rebecca immediately regretted it. She had given away too much, shown too much weakness. Daniel Wade would probably laugh at her pathetic story, hand over a few dollars to placate her, and then ride straight to the sheriff in Utica to have her arrested. But Daniel did not laugh. Instead, his expression softened, and he slowly reached into his vest pocket. Rebecca tensed, raising the gun higher, but he moved with deliberate care, pulling out a leather wallet. "What are you doing?" she asked warily. "Giving you what you need," Daniel said simply. He opened the wallet and began counting out bills, his movements unhurried. $200, you said. Rebecca stared at him, unable to process what was happening. This is a trick. No trick. Just someone who understands what it is like to watch family suffer and feel powerless to stop it. He finished counting and held out the money toward her. "Take it. Get your brother the help he needs." "Why would you do this?" Rebecca's hand wavered, the gun dipping slightly. Daniel's gray eyes met hers with an honesty that made her breath catch. "Because I believe people are worth saving. And because I think if you had any other choice, you would not be standing here pointing that gun at me right now." For a long moment, Rebecca stood frozen, every instinct warring inside her. This had to be a trap. People did not just hand over that kind of money to someone robbing them. But there was no deception in Daniel Wade's face, no hidden agenda in his eyes, just a quiet compassion that made her chest ache. Slowly, she reached out with her free hand and took the money, half expecting him to grab her wrist or for the driver to pull a hidden weapon. But neither man moved. Rebecca shoved the bills into her pocket and took several steps backward, keeping the gun raised even though her arm felt like lead. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate but sincere. "You are welcome," Daniel said, "but I want something in return." There it was, the catch. Rebecca's finger tightened on the trigger. "What?" "Come by my ranch tomorrow. It is the Wade property. Anyone in Utica can give you directions. I usually need extra hands during the summer months, and honest work pays better than highway robbery in the long run." He paused, then added, "And it is considerably safer." Rebecca shook her head, already backing toward the horse she had tied in the trees. "You are just saying that so you can have me arrested." "If I wanted you arrested, I would have drawn my own gun already," Daniel said, and for the first time, Rebecca noticed the holster at his hip. He had been armed this entire time and had not once reached for his weapon. "I am offering you a job, that is all. What you do with that offer is up to you." She did not respond, could not respond past the lump in her throat. Instead, she turned and ran for her horse, a chestnut mare she had borrowed from the livery by promising to have her back before nightfall. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to holster her gun and grab the reins. As she swung up into the saddle, she risked one glance back at the stagecoach. Daniel Wade still stood there, watching her with that same unreadable expression, while the driver had climbed back up to his seat and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. The passenger in the stagecoach seemed to be a woman in traveling clothes who had wisely stayed inside during the entire ordeal. Rebecca dug her heels into the mare's flanks and took off across the prairie, the money feeling like it was burning a hole through her pocket. She should feel triumphant, victorious even. She had done it, had gotten the money Thomas needed. But all she felt was confused and strangely moved by the cowboy who had handed over his gold without a fight, who had looked at her like she was more than just a common criminal. The ride back to Utica took less than an hour, though Rebecca's mind was moving so fast that it felt both longer and shorter at the same time. The town itself was small but growing, one of the many settlements that had sprung up in Montana Territory after gold was discovered in the region. Main Street boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, a bank, a doctor's office, a hotel, and a handful of other establishments. Rebecca and Thomas lived in a small rented room above the seamstress shop, where Rebecca had been taking and mending work to supplement the wages she earned washing dishes at the hotel restaurant. She returned the horse to the livery, paid for the rental with some of her precious remaining coins, and hurried through the back alleys to avoid being seen by too many people. The fewer folks who might remember her coming and going at unusual times, the better. When she finally climbed the narrow stairs to their room, she found Thomas right where she had left him, lying on the narrow bed they shared, his thin chest rising and falling with labored breaths. "Rebecca." His voice was weak, and the sound of it made her heart clench. "Where have you been?" "Out looking for work," she lied, hating herself for the deception even though she knew he would be horrified if he learned what she had really done. She crossed to the bed and pressed a hand to his forehead. He was burning up again, the fever that had been plaguing him for weeks showing no signs of breaking. "But I have good news. I got the money for Dr. Mitchell." Thomas's eyes widened and he tried to sit up, only to fall back against the pillows, coughing. When the fit passed, he looked at her with a mixture of hope and confusion. "How? Rebecca, what did you do?" "I found someone willing to lend it to me," she said, which was not entirely untrue, though she doubted Daniel Wade had expected to be repaid for money taken at gunpoint. "Do not worry about it right now. Just rest. I'm going to go see the doctor and get your medicine." She did not give Thomas time to ask more questions, instead grabbing her shawl and heading back out into the late afternoon heat. Dr. Mitchell's office was on the main street, a tidy building with a painted sign hanging above the door. Rebecca had been here dozens of times over the past 3 months, each visit leaving her more desperate and defeated as the costs mounted and her resources dwindled. The doctor was a middle-aged man with spectacles and thinning hair, competent enough at his profession, but with a businessman's heart when it came to collecting payment. When Rebecca entered, he looked up from the medical journal he had been reading and raised an eyebrow. "Miss Ashford, I assume you have come with the payment we discussed." "I have." Rebecca pulled the bills from her pocket and counted out $200 onto his desk, watching as his expression shifted from skepticism to satisfaction. "This covers Thomas's treatment and the medicine he needs, correct?" Dr. Mitchell picked up the money and counted it himself, then nodded. Indeed it does. I will prepare a tonic that should help manage his symptoms and reduce the fever. He will need to take it 3 times a day with meals if possible, and he should remain in bed, avoid any exertion. When can I pick it up? Give me an hour. The pharmacy needs to prepare it properly. Rebecca nodded and left the office, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. The money was gone, but Thomas would get the help he needed. That should be all that mattered. Yet she could not stop thinking about the way Daniel Wade had looked at her, without judgment or scorn, just understanding. And she could not stop hearing his offer of work echoing in her mind. She knew she should forget about it, should stay as far away from Daniel Wade as possible. He had seen her commit a crime, and even if he claimed he would not report her, there was no guarantee. The smart thing would be to keep her head down, continue with her legitimate jobs, and hope that Thomas recovered quickly enough that she would not need to resort to desperate measures again. But $200 would not last forever, and she still needed to pay rent, buy food, and cover a dozen other expenses that seemed to multiply faster than she could earn money. If Daniel's offer of work was genuine, and if it paid better than her current jobs, it might be the lifeline she needed to keep both herself and Thomas afloat. The next morning, after Thomas had taken his first dose of medicine and seemed to be resting more comfortably, Rebecca made her decision. She borrowed another horse from the livery, using the excuse that she was riding out to one of the nearby homesteads to deliver some mending work, and followed the directions the stable hand gave her to the Wade Ranch. The ride took her east out of Utica, across rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, and the occasional stand of trees. The land here was beautiful in its starkness, all golden grasses and endless sky, the kind of country that could either make or break a person depending on their fortitude and luck. After about 90 minutes, she spotted a collection of buildings in the distance, a main house, a barn, several smaller structures, and extensive corrals. As she drew closer, Rebecca could see men working in the corrals, breaking horses or tending to cattle. The ranch appeared to be a substantial operation, well-maintained and prosperous. She almost turned around, convinced that Daniel Wade had no real need for additional help and had only made the offer out of pity or some scheme she had not yet figured out. But before she could retreat, one of the ranch hands spotted her and called out. Within moments, Daniel himself emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore work clothes today, a simple shirt and trousers, his dark hair slightly disheveled. When he saw her, his expression shifted to something that might have been pleased surprise, though it was hard to tell from a distance. Rebecca dismounted as he approached, suddenly very aware that she was not wearing the bandana and hat that had partially concealed her identity during the robbery. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her green eyes had nowhere to hide. If Daniel had not been certain of her identity before, he would be now. "I was not entirely sure you would come," Daniel said as he stopped a respectful distance away. There was no accusation in his tone, just that same quiet honesty that had disarmed her yesterday. "I was not entirely sure I would either," Rebecca admitted. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "But you offered me work and I need it. If the offer was genuine." It was. Daniel glanced back at the barn, then returned his attention to her. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Handle cattle?" "I grew up on a farm before my parents passed. I know my way around livestock." Daniel nodded slowly, and she could see him making calculations behind those gray eyes. "The work is hard. Long days, especially during the summer. But I pay fair wages, provide meals for anyone working through dinner, and I do not ask questions about where people come from or what they might have done before they got here." All I care about is whether someone is willing to work honest and treat the animals and other hands with respect. Rebecca felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. I can do that. Then you are hired. When can you start? Is now too soon. A slight smile tugged at the corner of Daniel's mouth, the first real expression she had seen from him beyond calm neutrality. Now works just fine. Come on, I will introduce you to the foreman and get you set up. He led her toward the barn, and as they walked, Rebecca found herself studying him more closely. In the daylight, without the panic and adrenaline of the stagecoach robbery clouding her judgment, she could see that Daniel Wade was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. There were calluses on his hands and sun-weathered lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, completely at home in this environment. Can I ask you something? Rebecca ventured as they reached the barn entrance. Go ahead. Why are you doing this? Really? You do not know me. For all you know, I could rob you again the first chance I get. Daniel paused, considering her question with the same seriousness he seemed to apply to everything. I suppose that is a risk, but I do not think you will. How can you be so sure? Because you did not want to rob that stagecoach in the first place. You did it because you felt like you had no other choice, and now I am giving you one. People tend to make better decisions when they are not backed into a corner. He met her eyes, and there was a depth of understanding in his gaze that made her wonder what had happened in his life to give him such insight. Besides, I am a pretty good judge of character, and my instinct tells me you are someone worth trusting. His words settled over her like a warm blanket, simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Nobody had expressed that kind of faith in her in a long time, maybe ever. It made her want to live up to it and run away from it in equal measure. The foreman turned out to be a grizzled man in his 50s named Jack Brennan, who had been working ranches since before Rebecca was born. He looked her up and down with a skeptical eye, but did not protest when Daniel explained that she would be joining the crew. Within an hour, Rebecca found herself astride a working horse, riding out with 3 other ranch hands to check on a herd of cattle grazing in the north pasture. The work was indeed hard, harder than washing dishes or mending clothes, but Rebecca found it satisfying in a way those other jobs had never been. There was something honest about working with animals and land, something that made her feel useful and capable. The other hands mostly left her alone, though she caught them exchanging curious glances when they thought she was not looking. Women working cattle ranches were not unheard of in Montana territory, but they were uncommon enough to draw attention. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Rebecca's muscles ached, her skin was covered in dust, and she was fairly certain she smelled like cattle and horse sweat. But when Jack called it a day and they rode back to the main buildings, she felt more accomplished than she had in months. Daniel was waiting near the barn, apparently having been watching for their return. He dismissed the other hands to wash up for dinner, but gestured for Rebecca to stay behind. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Exhausting," Rebecca said honestly, dismounting with a barely suppressed groan. "But good. Really good, actually." "I am glad to hear it." Daniel took the reins of her horse and began leading the animal toward the barn to be unsaddled and brushed down. Rebecca followed, not wanting to seem like she expected special treatment. "You are welcome to stay for dinner if you want. Maria, our cook, always makes more than enough." Rebecca was tempted, both by the prospect of a hot meal she did not have to prepare herself, and by the chance to spend more time in Daniel's presence, which was becoming increasingly appealing in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude for his help. But she shook her head. I need to get back to Utica. My brother will be wondering where I am." "How is he doing?" "Your brother?" The question seemed genuinely concerned rather than merely polite. "Better, I think. The medicine the doctor gave him seems to be helping with the fever. It is too soon to know if it will really make a difference with the consumption, but at least he is more comfortable." "That is good." Daniel finished unsaddling the horse and grabbed a brush, working it over the animal's coat with practiced efficiency. "You know, if you want to make this a regular arrangement working here, I could probably use your help 5 or 6 days a week. The pay would be enough to cover your rent and expenses, I would think, with some leftover to save." Rebecca felt hope bloom in her chest, tentative but real. "You would trust me that much, to be here that often?" Daniel glanced at her over the horse's back, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Did you give me a reason not to? I held you up at gunpoint yesterday. And I gave you money and a job opportunity. I would say we are even." His tone was light, almost teasing, and Rebecca found herself smiling despite everything. "You are a strange man, Daniel Wade." "So I have been told." He finished with the horse and led the animal into a stall, making sure there was fresh water and hay available. When he emerged, he dusted off his hands and looked at her with an expression that was becoming familiar, that careful assessment mixed with something warmer. "But I like to think I am strange in mostly good ways." "I think so too," Rebecca said softly, then felt heat rise to her cheeks at the admission. To cover her embarrassment, she added quickly, "About the job, I mean, I appreciate it. More than you know." "You do not have to keep thanking me. You are earning your pay same as everyone else here." Daniel walked with her out of the barn and toward where her borrowed horse was tied. "But I am glad you decided to take the chance, on the work, and on trusting me." As Rebecca rode back toward Utica, the evening air cooling against her flushed skin, she found herself thinking about Daniel's words. Trusting him. Was that what she was doing? It seemed foolish to trust someone she had met while committing a crime, someone who had every reason to turn her in to the law. And yet there was something about Daniel Wade that made her believe his kindness was genuine, that he truly did see something in her worth investing in beyond just needing extra ranch hands. Over the following weeks, Rebecca fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. She would wake early, help Thomas take his medicine and eat a small breakfast, then ride out to the Wade Ranch where she would work until late afternoon. The labor was demanding but satisfying, and she learned quickly under Jack Brennan's gruff instruction and Daniel's quieter guidance. Her body adapted to the physical requirements, growing stronger and more capable. Thomas's condition stabilized and even seemed to improve slightly, the fever staying away for longer stretches, the coughing fits becoming less frequent. And through it all, Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to Daniel Wade in ways that went far beyond gratitude or professional respect. It started with small things. The way he always asked about Thomas, remembering details from previous conversations and genuinely caring about the answers. The way he treated all his workers with fairness and respect, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. The way he sometimes joined them in the fields or corrals, working alongside them rather than just directing from a distance. She learned that he had inherited the ranch from his father 3 years ago, when he was 23, and had built it up from a struggling operation into the thriving concern. It was now through sheer determination and smart management. She also learned that he was kind without being soft, capable of making tough decisions when necessary but never cruel or arbitrary. The other ranch hands respected him, and Maria, the cook who had been with the family for decades, clearly adored him like a son. There was a quiet strength to Daniel that Rebecca found herself admiring more with each passing day. What surprised her most, though, was that he seemed equally interested in her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable or felt predatory, but with genuine curiosity about who she was beyond the desperate young woman who had held up his stagecoach. During breaks or slow moments, they would talk, and Rebecca found herself sharing stories about her childhood on her parents' farm, about the dreams she had once had before illness and death had stolen them away, about her fears for Thomas and her hopes that he might still have a future beyond the sick room. Daniel listened to all of it with that quiet attention that made her feel heard in a way she rarely experienced. And sometimes he would share pieces of his own story, about the pressure of taking over the ranch so young, about the loneliness that came with responsibility, about his own losses and the ways he had learned to carry them. It was during one of these conversations, about 6 weeks after Rebecca had started working at the ranch, that something shifted between them. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, taking a break from the heat of the midday sun, drinking cool water that Maria had brought out. The other hands were scattered elsewhere, tending to various tasks, leaving Daniel and Rebecca in a bubble of relative privacy. "Can I ask you something personal?" Daniel said, his gray eyes fixed on the horizon where the mountains rose in the distance. "I suppose that depends on the question," Rebecca replied, though she had a feeling she would answer him honestly regardless. She always seemed to do that. "Why did you stay in Utica after your parents died when Thomas got sick? You could have gone somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunities or at least better doctors." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I thought about it, but Utica is the only home Thomas has really known. Our parents are buried here. And I suppose I was afraid that if we left, if we tried to start over somewhere else, I would lose the last connections I had to the life we used to have." "Foolish, maybe." "Not foolish," Daniel said. "Understandable. Roots matter, even when the ground they are planted in is hard." She turned to look at him, struck by the poetry in his words. "Is that why you stayed here, kept the ranch going even when it must have been overwhelming?" "Partly. But also because this place, this land, it is in my blood. I cannot imagine being anything other than a rancher, living anywhere other than here." He shifted his gaze to meet hers, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Though I will admit, the past few weeks have made me appreciate the ranch more than I have in a while." "Why is that?" Rebecca asked, though she thought she might know the answer, hoped she knew it. "Because having you here has reminded me that a place is only as good as the people you share it with." Daniel's voice was low, almost hesitant, as though he was testing uncertain ground. "Rebecca, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart started to race, though whether from anticipation or anxiety she could not quite tell. "What is it?" "When I offered you this job, it was because I believed you deserved a second chance, a way to provide for your brother without breaking the law. And that is still true. But over these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing who you are when you are not backed into a corner, I have developed feelings that go beyond just wanting to help someone in need." Rebecca's mouth went dry. She had been telling herself that the warmth she felt around Daniel was just gratitude, just appreciation for his kindness. But that was a lie, and she knew it. She had been falling for him almost from the moment he had handed over that money without judgment, and every day since had only deepened those feelings. "Daniel," she began, but he held up a hand gently. "You do not have to say anything right now. I know the situation is complicated. I am your employer, and you came to me out of desperation rather than choice. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. I just wanted you to know how I felt, to be honest about it, because dishonesty does not sit well with me." "Neither does it with me," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt. So I am going to be honest too. I have feelings for you as well, strong ones. And they terrify me because I never expected to feel this way about anyone, especially not now when my life is so uncertain and complicated. Daniel's expression softened and he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, rough from years of ranch work, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. "Life is always uncertain and complicated," he said quietly. "If we wait for the perfect moment, we will wait forever. What matters is whether we are willing to take the risk despite the complications." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, at the hope and vulnerability written there. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had seen her at her worst, and somehow found something worth caring about. How could she not take the risk? "I am willing," she whispered. Daniel's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his usually serious face into something radiant and young. He squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her skin that made her shiver despite the heat. "Then we will figure it out together. One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations beyond being honest with each other." "Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Rebecca said, and felt something that had been knotted tight in her chest for months finally begin to unravel. They sat there for a while longer, hands clasped, talking about small things and important things in equal measure, until Maria called them in for lunch, and they had to rejoin the world beyond their private moment. But something had fundamentally changed between them. A door had opened that Rebecca had not even realized she had been standing in front of. The following months brought changes that felt both dramatic and natural at the same time. Rebecca continued working at the ranch, but now there was an added layer to her interactions with Daniel, a awareness and affection that colored everything they did. They were careful to remain professional around the other ranch hands, not wanting to create awkwardness or the perception that Rebecca received special treatment because of their relationship. But during breaks, during the rides to and from town, during the quiet evening hours when work was done, they spent as much time together as possible. Daniel proved to be as thoughtful and genuine in courtship as he had been in everything else. He brought small gifts for Thomas, books and puzzles to help pass the long hours of recuperation. He never pushed Rebecca for more than she was ready to give, content to build their relationship on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect. They went on walks through the grasslands, rode out to see the sunset over the mountains, talked about their hopes and fears and dreams until Rebecca felt like Daniel knew her better than anyone ever had. And slowly, carefully, they built something real and lasting. Thomas's health continued to improve, the medicine and rest working their slow magic. By autumn, he was well enough to sit up for longer periods, to take short walks around their room, to talk about the future with something resembling optimism. Rebecca told him about Daniel, worried he might disapprove or feel abandoned, but Thomas surprised her with his wholehearted approval. "He is a good man, Rebecca. Anyone can see that. And you deserve to be happy to have something in your life besides just taking care of me." "Taking care of you is not a burden," she insisted, but Thomas shook his head. "Maybe not a burden, but it should not be your whole life either. I want you to live really live, not just survive. And it sounds like Daniel Wade makes you want to do that." He was right, of course. Daniel made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. Around him, she was not just Rebecca the caretaker, Rebecca the desperate woman willing to commit crimes to save her brother. She was simply Rebecca, with all her flaws and strengths, her past and her potential future, and that was enough. More than enough. As winter approached and the ranch work shifted to accommodate the changing season, Daniel asked Rebecca if she would like to move into one of the small cabins on the ranch property. "It would save you the daily ride to and from town," he explained. "And there is plenty of room for Thomas, too. The fresh air out here might be good for his recovery, better than being cooped up in that room above the seamstress shop." Rebecca was hesitant at first, worried about propriety and what people might say, but Daniel was insistent that everything would be proper and appropriate. The cabin would be theirs, with complete privacy, and he would continue to live in the main house with Maria serving as chaperone and protector of reputations. When Rebecca discussed it with Thomas, he was enthusiastic about the idea, tired of the confines of their small room and eager for a change of scenery. They moved in November, when the first snows were just beginning to dust the mountains in the distance. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and a main room that served as kitchen and living space. Daniel had made sure it was fully stocked with supplies before they arrived, and Maria had left a basket of fresh bread and preserves as a welcoming gift. Standing in the doorway of their new home, looking out at the vast expanse of ranch land stretching in every direction, Rebecca felt something she had not experienced in years: contentment, hope, a sense of possibility. "This is perfect," Thomas said from behind her, his voice stronger now than it had been in months. "Absolutely perfect." Rebecca turned to smile at her brother, then looked toward the main house where she knew Daniel was probably watching from a window, giving them space to settle in but remaining close enough if they needed anything. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It really is." That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the move, Daniel came to the cabin with firewood and an offer to make sure the fireplace was drawing properly. They ended up sitting in front of the fire, shoulders touching, talking in low voices so as not to wake Thomas. "Thank you for this," Rebecca said, gesturing at the cabin, at the life he had helped her build. "For everything. I do not think I have truly expressed how much it all means to me." Daniel was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Do you remember that day when you held up the stagecoach? When you pointed that gun at me with your hands shaking? How could I forget? It was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. I knew in that moment that I was going to help you. Even before you told me about Thomas, before I understood the full situation, something in me recognized something in you. A good person pushed to the breaking point, and I thought that if I could just give you a hand up, just offer you another option, maybe you would take it." He turned to look at her, the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "I am so glad you did. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being overwhelmed by emotion rather than sorrow. "Mine too," she whispered. "Even with everything I have been through, everything Thomas has been through, these months with you have made it all feel worthwhile, like it all led to this, to us." Daniel reached up and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Rebecca Ashford, I am in love with you. I think I have been since that day on the road, and every moment since has only made me more certain." Her breath caught, her heart stuttering in her chest. She had known, of course, had felt it in every gesture and word and look he had given her. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I am in love with you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "So much it scares me sometimes." "We can be scared together," Daniel said. And then he was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of all the promise of everything they could be together. It was not their first kiss. There had been stolen moments over the past months, brief touches of lips that left them both breathless and wanting more. But this kiss felt different, felt like a claiming and a surrender all at once, an acknowledgement that they were in this together now, whatever came next. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Rebecca. I know it might seem too soon, and if you need more time, I understand. But I know what I want, and I want a life with you, a real life, built on honesty and love and partnership." Rebecca's mind raced, considering all the practical concerns and potential complications. But when she looked into Daniel's eyes and saw the absolute sincerity there, all those concerns seemed to fade into insignificance. She had been surviving for so long, scraping by and fighting for every small victory. Daniel was offering her a chance to truly live, to build something lasting and beautiful. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place in early spring of 1877, in the small church in Utica, with Thomas standing as Rebecca's witness and Jack Brennan serving as Daniel's best man. Maria cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and declaring it the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The other ranch hands attended, along with a few folks from town who had gotten to know Rebecca through her work at the hotel and seamstress shop. It was a simple affair, no fancy decorations or elaborate celebrations, but it was perfect. Rebecca wore a dress that Maria had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Daniel wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed for once, his gray eyes never leaving Rebecca's face as she walked down the short aisle toward him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed her in front of everyone, Rebecca felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. This man who had seen her at her absolute lowest and had chosen to lift her up rather than condemn her. This man who had handed over his heart more readily than his gold, who had shown her that second chances were real and love could bloom even in the harshest soil. They moved into the main house after the wedding, the cabin becoming housing for a new ranch hand Daniel had hired. The main house had plenty of room, and Thomas came with them, taking a bedroom on the second floor where he could continue his recovery. Daniel insisted that Thomas was family now, and family stayed together. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt both familiar and wonderfully different. Rebecca continued to work the ranch alongside Daniel, their partnership extending from their personal life into their professional one. She had a gift for managing the books and correspondence, Daniel discovered, and soon she was handling much of the administrative work that he had always found tedious. Together, they made decisions about the ranch's future, planning expansions and improvements, building something that was truly theirs. Thomas's health continued to strengthen, until by summer he was well enough to start taking on light duties around the ranch himself. He would never be fully robust. The consumption had done lasting damage, but he found purpose in working with the horses, developing a natural talent for gentling even the most stubborn animals. Daniel encouraged this, giving Thomas increasing responsibility and treating him like the younger brother he had never had. Rebecca, sometimes, could not quite believe how much her life had changed in the span of a single year. From desperate outlaw to married rancher's wife, from barely scraping by to having a real home and family. It felt like a dream, except dreams had never been this vivid or this satisfying. One evening in late summer, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel took her hand and intertwined their fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "That day on the road, the choice you made?" Rebecca thought about it, really considered the question. "I regret that I felt desperate enough to do it, that I did not have better options at the time, but I cannot regret the outcome because it led me to you. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Daniel said, squeezing her hand. "It makes you human. We all do things we are not proud of when we are pushed hard enough. What matters is what we do after, whether we learn and grow or let those moments define us." "You helped me do that," Rebecca said. "Helped me move beyond that moment into something better." "We helped each other," Daniel corrected. "You reminded me that this ranch, all this land and these cattle, it does not mean much if you do not have someone to share it with. You gave my life meaning it had been missing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the evening breeze carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. It was peaceful, perfect, everything Rebecca had never dared to dream she might have. "I am pregnant," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could second-guess herself. She had been waiting for the right moment to tell him, but somehow this moment, quiet and ordinary and beautiful, felt exactly right. Daniel went very still beside her, then turned to look at her with an expression of stunned wonder. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have been feeling unwell in the mornings and I am late, and Maria figured it out before I even said anything and has been giving me these knowing looks." Rebecca laughed, though her hands were trembling slightly. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Daniel's voice cracked slightly, and she realized he was fighting tears. "Rebecca, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and so in love with you I can barely think straight." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Rebecca could feel his heart racing against her chest. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other as the night deepened around them, thinking about the future they were building together. The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca spent the first few months battling near constant nausea, and as her body changed and grew, the physical work of the ranch became more challenging. Daniel hovered anxiously, trying not to be overbearing but clearly worried, until Rebecca finally sat him down and told him she was pregnant, not made of glass, and needed him to trust that she would ask for help when she needed it. He did his best, though she caught him watching her with concerned eyes whenever she did anything remotely strenuous. Maria was more practical, adjusting Rebecca's diet and making sure she rested enough while still encouraging her to stay active. Thomas treated the impending arrival of a niece or nephew with excitement mixed with carefully concealed terror, clearly worried something would go wrong, but trying to remain optimistic. Winter came, blanketing the ranch in snow and limiting the outdoor work that could be done. Rebecca spent more time inside, managing the books and planning for the spring. Her belly grew round and prominent, and she felt the baby move inside her, little flutters that gradually became stronger kicks and rolls. Daniel loved to place his hand on her stomach and feel those movements, his face lighting up with wonder every single time. In February of 1878, during one of the coldest nights of the year, Rebecca went into labor. It was long and difficult, made more challenging by the fact that the doctor from Utica could not make it through the snow-blocked roads. Maria stepped in, having helped deliver more babies than she could count over her long life, and guided Rebecca through the process with firm competence. Daniel stayed by Rebecca's side the entire time, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement, looking nearly as exhausted and pained as she felt. When their son finally arrived, screaming his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world, Daniel actually did cry, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect human they had created together. They named him James, after Daniel's father, with the middle name Thomas in honor of Rebecca's brother. He was a healthy baby with a surprisingly loud cry and a tuft of dark hair that stuck up in all directions. Rebecca held him and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it almost frightened her in its intensity. "We made this," she whispered to Daniel, who was kneeling beside the bed, one finger gently held in their son's tiny fist. "This perfect, beautiful person." "We did," Daniel agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "And we are going to give him the best life we possibly can." They were true to that promise. As James grew from infant to toddler to young boy, he was surrounded by love and stability. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel and Rebecca's management, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. Thomas became the ranch's head horse trainer, his gentle way with animals making him invaluable and giving him a purpose that helped him continue to thrive despite his health limitations. 2 years after James was born, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a quieter baby than her brother but with the same dark hair and her mother's green eyes. And 3 years after that, another son arrived, Michael, who seemed determined from the very beginning to keep up with his older siblings no matter what. The house that had once seemed too large for just Daniel and Maria filled with noise and life and laughter. There were scraped knees to bandage and arguments to mediate and bedtime stories to read. There were cattle drives and roundups, harsh winters and drought-threatened summers, the constant challenges of ranch life that required resilience and adaptability. But through it all, Rebecca and Daniel faced everything together, their partnership as strong in marriage as it had been in courtship. They had disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and misunderstanding that came with any long-term relationship. But they had built their foundation on honesty and respect, and those qualities carried them through the difficult times. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Rebecca by taking her back to the spot where she had held up his stagecoach. It was a journey they had never made together, though Rebecca had sometimes thought about that stretch of road and what had transpired there. They stood under the cottonwood trees, older now and fuller, the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves in patterns of light and shadow. Rebecca looked at the road, remembering her terror and desperation, how her hands had shaken and her voice had trembled. "You know what I thought when I first saw you that day?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "That I was the worst outlaw you had ever encountered." Rebecca guessed with a slight smile. "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met," Daniel said seriously. "Not because you were robbing a stagecoach, but because you were willing to do whatever it took to save someone you loved. That kind of devotion, that kind of courage, it impressed me more than you can imagine." Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sunshine and home. "I handed you my desperation that day, and you handed me your heart. I think I got the better end of that deal." "I disagree," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I got exactly what I needed, even if I did not know it at the time. A partner, a love, a family. Everything I have now started the moment you pointed that gun at me with your hands shaking." They stood there for a while, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from that strange beginning. The road stretched out before them, the same road that had brought them together, and Rebecca thought about all the miles they had traveled since that day, all the challenges they had faced and overcome. "Come on," she said, taking Daniel's hand and leading him back toward their horses. "Let us go home." Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children and the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a serious young man who inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Sarah proved to have a gift for numbers and organization, taking over more and more of the ranch's administrative work as she got older. Michael was the wild one, always seeking adventure and testing boundaries, keeping his parents on their toes. Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives, never marrying but seeming content with his role as beloved uncle and horse trainer. His health remained fragile, and there were occasional setbacks that worried everyone, but he outlived the doctor's early predictions by decades. Maria continued to run the household with benevolent tyranny, declaring that she would keep working until they carried her out, and making good on that promise until she finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Her loss was deeply felt by the entire family, but especially by Daniel, who had known her his entire life. The ranch continued to grow and evolve. Daniel and Rebecca made a point of treating their workers fairly, paying good wages and providing decent housing. And as a result, they had loyal employees who stayed for years. They became known throughout Montana Territory, and later Montana State after it achieved statehood in 1889, as honest ranchers who could be trusted and respected. Rebecca sometimes looked back on the young woman she had been, desperate and terrified, willing to risk everything for her brother's life, and marveled at the distance she had traveled. She had gone from outlaw to wife to mother to ranch co-owner, building a life she never could have imagined during those dark days when Thomas was dying, and she saw no way forward. And it had all started because Daniel Wade had chosen to see her as a person rather than a criminal, had chosen compassion over condemnation, had handed over his heart instead of his gold. On a warm summer evening when Rebecca was 52 years old, she sat on the porch of the ranch house with Daniel, watching the sunset as they had done countless times over the years. Their children were grown now, James running the ranch alongside his father, Sarah married to a lawyer in Helena and expecting her second child, Michael working as a horse trader and traveling throughout the West. Thomas was inside, reading by the fire despite the warm weather, his hair gone gray and his movements slower but his mind as sharp as ever. The ranch hands had finished their work for the day and were gathered around the bunkhouse, their laughter drifting across the evening air. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been?" Rebecca asked, her hand in Daniel's, their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing. "If I had not held up that stagecoach, if I had found some other way, or if you had not been on that particular coach that day." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering the question as he always did, never dismissing her thoughts as trivial or foolish. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not in the same way, maybe it would have taken longer, but I believe some things are meant to be." "You are a romantic," Rebecca teased gently. "Only when it comes to you," Daniel replied, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. His hair was more silver than dark now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but to Rebecca he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him step out of that stagecoach, calm and steady in the face of her shaking gun. "I am glad I held up your stagecoach," Rebecca said softly. "I am glad I was desperate enough and brave enough and foolish enough to do it, because it brought me to you and to this life, and I would not trade any of it for anything. Not even for an easier path, one with less struggle." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "The struggle made us who we are. It made us appreciate what we have. If everything had been easy, we might have taken it for granted." Daniel pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. They sat like that as the sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge, two people who had found love in the most unlikely of places and nurtured it into something that had lasted a lifetime. Inside the house, Thomas called out that he had put coffee on if anyone wanted some. The sound of his voice, still strong despite his age and health challenges, made Rebecca smile. He had survived against all odds, had lived to see his sister build a family and a legacy, had found his own purpose and contentment. The $200 she had been so desperate to obtain all those years ago had been the down payment on a future she never could have imagined. "Coffee sounds good," Daniel called back, then looked at Rebecca with a raised eyebrow. "What do you say?" "I say we are blessed beyond measure," Rebecca replied, rising from her seat but keeping hold of Daniel's hand. "And I say I love you more now than I did 30 years ago, which I would not have thought possible." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Daniel said, standing and pulling her into his arms for a kiss that still made her heart race after all these years. "Entirely, completely, absolutely mutual." They went inside together, hand in hand, closing the door on the evening and settling into the warm comfort of their home. The ranch would still be there tomorrow, with all its demands and challenges and rewards. But for now, there was just this: family and love and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Rebecca had held up a stagecoach at gunpoint all those years ago, desperate and terrified and out of options. And Daniel Wade had handed over his heart instead of his gold, seeing something in her worth saving, worth investing in, worth loving. It had been the best trade either of them had ever made. As the years continued their inevitable march, Rebecca and Daniel grew old together in the way of couples who have truly partnered through life's challenges. They moved slower, their hair turned completely white, but their love remained vibrant and present. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the house bursting with multiple generations of the family they had created. Thomas passed peacefully at the age of 71, surrounded by family, his last words a whispered thank you to Rebecca for never giving up on him. His death was grieved deeply, but it was also celebrated, a life that had been saved and well lived, full of purpose and meaning despite the illness that could have claimed him as a boy. Rebecca and Daniel continued on, their partnership unbroken even as their bodies weakened. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, holding hands and watching the sunsets they had seen thousands of times but never tired of. They told stories to their grandchildren about the old days, about how Montana Territory had become a state, about the changes they had witnessed over their long lives. And sometimes, when the grandchildren begged for a story, Rebecca would tell them about the day she held up a stagecoach, though she always emphasized the desperation that had driven her to it and the mercy that had saved her from the consequences. She told them about their grandfather's kindness, his willingness to see beyond the crime to the person behind it. "That is how you should treat people," she would say, looking at the young faces gathered around her. "With compassion and understanding, always looking for ways to lift others up rather than tear them down. You never know when your kindness might change someone's entire life." The grandchildren would nod solemnly, absorbing the lesson, while Daniel would catch Rebecca's eye and smile, that same warm smile that had captured her heart so many years ago. Rebecca passed first, in her sleep at the age of 76, her hand still clasped in Daniel's. He grieved her loss with a depth that spoke to the profound connection they had shared, but he did not crumble beneath it. Instead, he carried her memory with him, honoring her by continuing to run the ranch with the same principles they had established together, by loving their family as fiercely as she had, by being the man she had believed him to be from that very first day. Daniel followed her 3 years later at the age of 80, surrounded by his children and several grandchildren. His last words were of Rebecca, of how much he loved her and how grateful he was for every moment they had shared. And then he closed his eyes and was gone, reunited with the woman who had pointed a gun at him with shaking hands and somehow, miraculously, become the love of his life. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the years of their lives. The ranch continued under James's management, then passed to his children, carrying on the legacy that Daniel and Rebecca had built together. And sometimes, when the wind blew across the Montana grasslands, and the sun set over the mountains in shades of orange and pink, people swore they could feel a presence on that hill. Two souls still holding hands, still watching over the land and family they had loved so deeply. It was a love story born of desperation and compassion, of second chances and chosen trust, of a woman who had held up a stagecoach at gunpoint and a man who had handed over his heart instead of his gold. And it was a love story that had lasted not just a lifetime, but for all the generations that followed, a testament to the transformative power of mercy, understanding, and love. The ranch still stood, a thriving operation that bore the Wade name and carried the values its founders had established over a century before. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and families gathered on porches to watch the sunset, they told the story of Daniel and Rebecca, of how an act of desperation had led to a lifetime of love, of how choosing compassion over condemnation could change not just one life, but countless lives that followed. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth living by. And it all started on a dusty Montana road in the summer of 1876, when two people who should have been adversaries chose instead to see the humanity in each other and build something beautiful from that unlikely beginning. The end of their mortal lives was not truly an ending at all, but rather a transformation, their love and legacy living on in the land they had tended, the family they had raised, and the story that would be passed down through generations. Rebecca had been right all those years ago when she said she would not trade any of it for an easier path. The struggle, the fear, the desperate choice that had brought them together, all of it had been necessary to create something worth having, worth keeping, worth cherishing forever. And so the story concluded not with an ending, but with a continuation, the ranch still operating under the same principles of fairness and compassion, the family still gathering to share meals and stories and love, the land still rolling away toward distant mountains under endless Montana sky. Daniel and Rebecca's love had started with an act of surprising mercy on a dusty road, and it had grown into something that transcended their individual lives, becoming part of the very fabric of the place they had called home. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages, proving that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, even when people were pushed to their breaking points and forced to make impossible choices, love could still bloom, kindness could still triumph. And two people brave enough to trust each other, despite every reason not to, could build a legacy that would last far beyond their own lives, inspiring others to choose compassion over judgment, understanding over condemnation, love over fear. The story of the woman who held up a stagecoach at gunpoint and the cowboy who handed over his heart instead of his gold became legend in Montana, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy and embellishment. But at its core, the truth remained constant. Daniel Wade had seen Rebecca Ashford at her most desperate and chosen to help rather than condemn. And Rebecca had taken that second chance and transformed it into a life of meaning, purpose, and deep, abiding love. Their descendants carried that legacy forward, generation after generation, building on the foundation of compassion and hard work that Daniel and Rebecca had established. The ranch weathered economic depressions and droughts, world wars, and changing times. But it survived and even thrived because of the strong roots its founders had planted. And every so often, when someone new heard the story of Daniel and Rebecca for the first time, they would ask the same question. Why had Daniel been so willing to help someone who was literally robbing him? The answer was always the same, because he had recognized in Rebecca something worth saving, a fundamentally good person pushed to the edge by circumstances beyond her control. And because he had understood that everyone deserves a second chance, a hand up when they have fallen, a reason to hope when hope seems lost. That philosophy, that deep belief in the fundamental worth and potential of every human being, became the cornerstone of everything the Wade family stood for. It influenced how they treated their workers, how they conducted business, how they raised their children, how they moved through the world. It was Daniel and Rebecca's greatest legacy, more valuable than the ranch itself, more enduring than any material wealth. And so the story truly ended not with death but with continuation, with ongoing life and love and the ripple effects of one man's choice to extend mercy instead of judgment. One woman's courage to accept help and transform her life, and the beautiful partnership they built together that changed not just their own destinies, but the destinies of countless others who came after them. It was a story of the Wild West, but more importantly, it was a story of the wild and untamable nature of the human heart, capable of remarkable compassion even in the harshest circumstances, capable of profound love even in the most unlikely situations, capable of creating beauty and meaning from the rawest materials of desperation and need. Rebecca Ashford had held up Daniel Wade's Stagecoach at gunpoint in July of 1876, her hands shaking and her heart breaking, expecting condemnation and finding compassion instead. Daniel Wade had handed over his money without hesitation, but more importantly, he had handed over his heart, his trust, his belief in her potential for redemption and growth. And together, they had built something that lasted far beyond their individual lives, a love story that became legend, a legacy that shaped generations, a testament to the transformative power of choosing kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, love over fear. And if you listened carefully on quiet Montana evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars blazed overhead in their ancient patterns, you could almost hear their voices still, Daniel's steady and calm, Rebecca's warm and grateful, both of them laughing together at the unlikely path that had brought them to each other and the beautiful life they had created from such an unpromising beginning. Their story was complete, their love immortal, their legacy assured, and the land they had loved still rolled on toward distant mountains, eternal and enduring, just like the love that had made it all possible.